in Culpepper County, Virginia. 23 people died between April and September of 1859. All were found with broken necks or crushed windpipes. There were no witnesses and no sounds of struggle. The official records dismissed these deaths as accidents or natural causes, but the records never mentioned the terrifying commonality. Every victim lived within 3 miles of the Rutledge Plantation, and those records deliberately concealed that 3 weeks before the first death, something had emerged from a cellar that had been sealed shut for 12 years. The Confederate Army's own declassified documents contain a single, disturbing line regarding Culpepper County in 1859. Local situation resolved. Witnesses silenced. Recommend no further investigation. This account was buried for over a century, hidden in archives that were never meant to be opened. If stories like this, deliberately erased from history, interest you, subscribe to the Forgotten Liturgy and hit that notification bell. Now, let me tell you about a man named Silas and the 12 years that transformed him into something that still haunts Culpepper County to this day. The story begins in 1847 at the Rutledge Plantation. Colonel Thaddeus Rutledge was a man of particular cruelties, described by neighbors as dignified, but hiding a rage that could drop into a terrifying whisper. The plantation was modest, worked by 42 enslaved people. From birth, Silas was different. His skin lacked pigment, his hair was white as cotton, and his pale gray eyes seemed to look through people rather than at them. The other workers whispered he was marked, but Silas had one valuable asset, an almost supernatural ability with horses. The most violent stallion would calm beneath his pale hands. By age 24, he was the head groom. In March of 1847, Silas encountered a free black seamstress named Hannah during a trip to town. Their 3-minute conversation planted a seed of catastrophe. She told him about freedom and wages in the North. Silas began to meticulously plan his escape. On the night of May 17, 1847, Silas made his attempt, moving like a ghost through the memorized shadows. He made it almost 3 miles before the dogs and the overseer, Virgil Pute, rode him down at dawn. They dragged him back, battered and torn. When thrown at Colonel Rutledge's feet, Silas didn't beg. He simply looked up with those pale, unblinking eyes, and a mutual hatred passed between them. Rutledge chose a punishment worse than whipping or being sold south. "Take him to the root cellar," the colonel said quietly. "Lock the door. No one enters without my permission." The root cellar was a stone chamber beneath the kitchen house, secured by a heavy wooden door and a padlock. On the morning of May 18, 1847, they threw Silas down the stone steps. The last things he experienced were a rectangle of blue sky and the scrape of the bolt. Sliding home, the darkness inside was absolute. The air was damp and thick with the smell of earth. For the first week, Silas screamed, beating his fists against the door until they bled, but by the second week, he stopped. He understood that this was not a temporary punishment. This was a deliberate attempt to bury him alive. In the complete absence of light, time became meaningless. To fight off immediate madness, Silas created a new, rigid routine. He began to move constantly, pacing the perimeter of the 12-foot by 8-foot cellar, counting his 47 steps. He performed squats and push-ups until his muscles trembled, keeping his body from seizing up entirely. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. The only variation was the quality of the scraps shoved through the door. Silas stopped speaking entirely after the 3rd month. He lived entirely inside his own head, replaying memories with perfect clarity. He was not just surviving. In that absolute darkness and silence, Silas was transforming. His body, denied light, was being forged by endless physical routine. His mind, denied external input, was sharpening, becoming something focused, cold, and relentlessly patient. He was preparing for a day that would take 12 years to arrive. Silas survived in the cellar, not by breaking, but by reshaping his mind the way a tree grows around an obstacle. He perfected a kind of deep meditation, sitting motionless for hours, existing in a blank void that matched the void around him, but his mind sharpened when the occasional scraps of food arrived. Silas developed an almost superhuman ability to listen. The thick wooden door could not stop the sound of footsteps. He catalogued every person by their unique walk: Rutledge's heavy, deliberate tread, Pute's slight scrape, favoring his left leg, Benjamin's rapid, nervous steps, the cook's cracking knees. He built a mental map of the world above, based purely on sound and rhythm. His body, starved but relentlessly exercised, became dense and efficient. He trained in absolute darkness for thousands of hours, learning to place his feet with such care that even he couldn't hear his own footsteps. Silence became his ultimate weapon. Touch became everything. He memorized every crack in the stone, every irregularity in the damp walls. When rats found their way in, they became his secret textbooks. He would catch them, not to eat, but to study. He learned the rapid flutter of their hearts and the precise, fragile structure of their necks. This knowledge settled into his bones, becoming instinctive. By the 5th year, Silas had ceased to be conventionally human. He was a creature of darkness and silence, his senses recalibrated, his mind restructured around a single, cold certainty: vengeance. He never forgot Rutledge's face, and he waited with the infinite patience of stone for the door to open one final time. Above him, the world was nearing collapse. Political tensions escalated, and Virginia was gripped by paranoia. Rutledge grew older, his isolation absolute. Every 3 days, the dreaded task of feeding Silas rotated among the servants. They hated the duty, not because Silas was violent, but because of his terrifying silence. As one servant, Benjamin, whispered, "Looking into that cellar was like looking into a grave where something was still alive." Then came April 3, 1859. Colonel Thaddeus Rutledge suffered a devastating stroke. He was paralyzed and unable to speak clearly, communicating only through frantic gestures. He lingered for 3 weeks. He died on April 23 at 3 o'clock in the morning. Benjamin was with him. In his final moments, Rutledge's left hand was making a repetitive, frantic turning motion, as if unlocking a door that only he could see. With Rutledge dead, the plantation immediately descended into disarray. The rigid routine that had sustained the horror for 12 years instantly broke down. Amid the chaos, the one thing everyone forgot was the cellar. The daily feeding stopped. For 3 days, Silas received nothing. This wasn't unusual. But on the 4th day, he registered the unnatural quiet above. No Rutledge, no Pute, no footsteps on a schedule. Silence had been his companion for 12 years, but this silence was wrong. It felt empty. Silas finally understood. The person who held the key, the person who held the entire system together, was gone, in the absolute darkness. Silas began to move with a quiet intensity he had never used before. He approached the cellar door. The iron bolt and padlock were still secured, but the lock had a new enemy: 12 years of silence, endless routine, and an almost perfectly adapted mind. Silas wasn't going to wait anymore. Silas couldn't know that most of the enslaved people had been sold south, leaving only a skeleton crew, Pute, to field hands, and an elderly cook. On the evening of April 28, 1859, 5 days after Rutledge's death, a field hand named Thomas entered the kitchen house. He had no knowledge of the cellar, but curiosity led him to the old, rusted padlock. He found the lock mechanism was worn through. With a sharp tug, the lock broke open. A smell, organic and old, rose from below. Thomas lit his lamp and cautiously descended. He found the figure in the far corner, impossibly thin, his skin glowing faintly in the lamplight. White hair hung to his shoulders. When those pale, Colorless eyes opened. They looked at Thomas with perfect clarity and no surprise. "My God," Thomas whispered. "How long have you been down here?" The figure, Silas, didn't answer. He simply looked at Thomas with those terrifying, patient eyes. Thomas ran in terror, leaving the lamp and the door open. This was not a man. It was something the darkness had changed. Thomas found Pute, the overseer, and with a rush of frantic words, explained what he'd found. Pute immediately armed himself and returned to the kitchen house, but the cellar was empty. Thomas's lamp burned on the steps, the tin plate sat in the center, but the figure was gone. "Where is he?" Pute demanded. They searched for an hour, finding no tracks, no sign of anyone leaving the cellar. By midnight, Pute convinced himself Thomas had imagined it and secured the door with a new lock. They didn't know. Silas had left the cellar the moment Thomas had run up the steps. He moved with absolute silence into the night, his eyes adjusting instantly to the relative brightness. For the first time in 12 years, Silas was free, and he had a list. The first death occurred 4 days later. On May 2, 1859, Virgil Pute was found dead in the barn. He was sitting upright, eyes open, his neck broken, completely severed at the spine. There were no signs of struggle, and Pute's loaded shotgun was untouched 5 feet away. The county sheriff, Walter Cunningham, ruled it an interrupted robbery, though nothing was stolen. A search party with dogs combed the woods and found nothing. The Rutledge property was locked up, and the remaining enslaved people were sent to town for auction. 2 weeks passed. Then, on May 17th, exactly 12 years to the day, Silas was locked in the cellar. A farmer named John Keller was found dead in his tobacco field, 2 miles from the plantation. Keller was notable for his aggressive participation in slave patrols. Like Pute, his neck was broken. Unlike Pute, Keller's hands were bruised and cut. He had fought, but whatever killed him was fast and overwhelmingly strong. This death troubled Sheriff Cunningham. For someone to kill a paranoid, light sleeper inside a secure home without waking 3 grown sons suggested impossible stealth. Cunningham began to look for patterns. 2 deaths, both by broken neck, both men tied to plantation operations. He then found an old entry in the Rutledge records, mentioning a runaway slave caught and locked in the cellar 12 years prior. Cunningham rode to the abandoned plantation. He broke the new lock, descended into the darkness, and found the cellar empty. But on one wall, he found hundreds and hundreds of marks scratched into the stone, organized in groups of 7, days counted, years tallied. The sheriff climbed back into the sunlight, deeply uneasy. He knew whatever had happened in that cellar had now been unleashed. Sheriff Cunningham tracked down Benjamin, the house servant, who confirmed the horrific truth. Silas had been kept in that cellar for 12 years, fed just enough to survive, and when Rutledge died, the feeding had simply stopped. Benjamin confirmed Thomas's story. Silas was gone within the hour Thomas opened the door. Cunningham put out a warning for an extremely dangerous 36-year-old albino man suspected in 2 murders. 3 days later, the violence escalated. Marcus Webb, a retired slave trader, was killed in his sleep, suffocated with his own pillow. The pillow was left pressed to his face, held in place by Webb's own folded hands. This suggested a theatrical cruelty, a message. You won't see us. You won't hear us. And you can't stop us. The killings continued through May and June. The victims seemed random until Cunningham found the connection. Every victim had worked for the Rutledge Plantation, served on slave patrols, or captured runaways. Someone was working through a meticulous execution list. By July, 19 people were dead. The panic was breaking into hysteria. Richmond sent a special investigator, Captain Edward Hayes, a former Army officer experienced in tracking girls. Hayes studied the pattern and confirmed, this isn't random violence. This is an execution list. Hayes implemented a drastic strategy. He published a notice asking anyone connected to Rutledge between 1847 and 1859 to report for protection. 47 terrified people presented themselves. Hayes housed them in the town's largest guarded buildings. For 5 nights, the town held its breath. Then, a guard at the Methodist church was found dead, his neck broken. The killer had walked past him, entered, and left without a sound. Inside the church, Hayes found a list written in chalk on the wall. 19 names were crossed out. At the top of the remaining names, underlined 3 times, was Benjamin Rutledge, Rutledge's cousin, who had inherited the plantation and authorized the sale of the enslaved people, had just arrived in town. Hayes and Cunningham raced to the Chapman Hotel. They burst into room 7. Benjamin Rutledge sat by the window, his head tilted forward, motionless. His neck was broken, his spine completely severed. The window was open to the alley below. On the windowsill, Hayes found pale handprints in the dust. He climbed up the outside of the building. Hayes said quietly, "Second floor brick wall, no hand." He climbed it like it was nothing. This death changed everything. The killer wasn't just silent. He was capable of impossible physical feats. The panic broke into full-scale flight. Families fled the county. Hayes knew he had to stop hunting for a ghost and start hunting for absolute stillness. The answer came from Thomas, the field hand who had opened the cellar. "He's patient, sir. More patient than any person I've ever seen. I think he was waiting in the cellar. He can hide in plain sight because he doesn't need to move." Hayes organized a new search, moving slowly, methodically, checking every shadow and crawl space. 3 hours after midnight, they found him in the abandoned grist mill on the edge of town. Silas was sitting motionless in the rafters, 20 feet above the floor, his pale skin nearly invisible against the whitewashed beams. When the lantern light found him, his eyes reflected like an animal's, pale and unblinking. "Silas," Hayes called up, "come down. We need to talk." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Silas moved, even watching for it. The men barely saw him. He simply dropped from the rafter, landing in a crouch that should have shattered his legs, then straightened and stood facing them in the lantern light. Silas looked less like a man and more like something carved from white stone, possibly thin, yet perfectly balanced. He stood absolutely still, his colorless eyes assessing Captain Hayes and the 3 deputies. "I know what happened to you," Hayes said. "I know about the cellar. 12 years. No man should endure what you endured." When Silas finally spoke, his voice was a harsh whisper, rusty from disuse. "The law." The single word carried overwhelming contempt. Hayes argued, "You've killed 20 people. The law still applies. You have to answer for what you've done. Why not?" Silas countered simply. The question stunned Hayes. In the silence, a young deputy named Peter made an unconscious move toward his pistol. In less than 3 seconds, Silas moved. He closed the 15-foot distance, pressed his hand against Peter's carotid artery in a specific, precise way, and the deputy collapsed, unconscious, but alive. It was a measured response, a warning. Silas vanished into the shadows. Before the other men could react, Hayes found a space in the rafters where Silas had been living, along with a piece of paper, the execution list, complete with notes on victims' routines, times, and locations. Silas had been watching them for weeks. The siege began. The town locked down. But on August 15th, a man on Silas's list, Howard Fleming, defied orders and returned to his farm outside of town. Hayes rode out immediately. They found Fleming and his 2 sons dead, their necks broken, but the chilling detail was on the kitchen table. 3 tin cups of water and 3 pieces of cornbread. A macabre mirror of Silas's own 12-year rations. "He's not going to stop," Hayes stated. "He is making statements. Each death is a chapter in a story he is telling." The key came from Benjamin, the former house servant. There's one more place he might go, Benjamin whispered. The cellar, where it all started. He needs to finish it there. It was a thin theory, but Hayes had no choice. He organized an ambush. 20 of the county's best shots surrounded the Rutledge Plantation at midnight on August 28th. The cellar door was left unlocked, slightly ajar an invitation. An hour before dawn, a pale figure emerged from the shadows. Silas walked unhurriedly across the yard, reached the cellar door, paused, and descended into the darkness. Hayes counted to 30, then gave the signal. 20 men converged on the kitchen house. Hayes descended first, pistol drawn. Silas was sitting in the same corner where Thomas had found him, his back against the stone wall. "Silas, it's over," Hayes said. "It ends here." Silas looked at him, and for the first time, Hayes saw a flicker of emotion in those colorless eyes. Exhaustion, perhaps, or satisfaction. "It ended 12 years ago," Silas said quietly. "This is just finishing what was started. They took 12 years from me. 12 years of darkness. They made me into this, and now they're surprised when this is what they get." Hayes could only stand there, unable to argue. The law had failed. Silas was captured and transported to Richmond. The official report stated he was hanged on October 1st, 1859, a month before John Brown's execution. His list was complete. 23 people were dead. But the story didn't end there. Sheriff Cunningham and Captain Hayes left the county shortly after. The truth of the cellar was suppressed, deemed too inflammatory in a state on the brink of civil war. The deaths were simply recorded as the result of a local insurrection that was brutally put down. The official records never mentioned that every victim was connected to the same plantation. They never mentioned the cellar. And they never mentioned the horrifying possibility that Silas was not the murderer, but the final, inevitable consequence of an inherently evil system. The story of the Rutledge cellar was officially erased, but the chilling whisper remains. Do you think Silas deserved a trial, or was his revenge justified? The people of Culpepper County never forgot the ghost man who moved like smoke and judged with the finality of stone. If you enjoyed this terrifying true crime history, subscribe to the Forgotten Liturgy and share this chilling tale. "You want to talk to me about law now?" Silas whispered. After everything, Hayes found he had no answer. The law had failed him completely. "So what now?" Hayes asked. "You disappear. You keep killing. I go north," Silas said simply. "Pennsylvania. Find a woman named Hannah who told me about freedom. That was the plan 12 years ago. That's still the plan." Hayes knew the truth. The county wanted this nightmare to end. If Silas disappeared, everyone would be relieved to let the mystery vanish. "I can't let you go," Hayes said, but the conviction was gone. "You can't stop me," Silas replied, standing up with impossible control. "I've had 12 years to think about this moment. Do you really think I walked into this cellar without knowing exactly how to walk back out?" Before anyone could react, Silas moved, not toward the men, but toward the wall. His hand pressed against a section of stone, and a 3-foot square pushed inward, revealing darkness. "The plantation was part of the Underground Railroad," Silas said, pausing at the opening. "His father built this tunnel, connecting the cellar to a root cellar in the woods half a mile away. I found it after 3 years of searching these walls, 1 inch at a time." He looked back at Hayes. "I could have left any time after that, but I waited. I waited until Rutledge was dead, until everyone who put me here could understand what it meant to be hunted. The story is already written." Hayes raised his pistol, but his hand shook. This man had adapted, transformed, become something that existed outside normal human limitations. Hayes lowered his gun. Silas nodded once, a gesture of respect or simple farewell. Then he was gone, vanished into the darkness. Captain Edward Hayes filed his official report on September 3, 1859. It stated that Silas, the escaped slave responsible for 23 murders, had taken his own life by hanging in the very cellar where he had been imprisoned. The body, Hayes wrote, had been burned. No one questioned the report. Hayes had given the people of Culpepper County permission to believe the nightmare was over, but the rumors began immediately. Some said they had seen a pale figure moving north along fugitive paths. Others claimed that, in Pennsylvania, a white-haired man with an uncanny ability to move without sound was working with the Underground Railroad, still searching for his promise. Benjamin, the former house servant, told a story before he died. One night, a pale figure with white hair sat at the foot of his bed and whispered, "You fed me. Even when others forgot, you remembered. Thank you." The Rutledge Plantation was abandoned for decades. The cellar remained locked, its secrets buried. In 1923, when a developer tore down the kitchen house, workers broke through the floor. They found the bones of 7 rats arranged in a circle, and in the center, scratched into the stone. Remember, today a shopping center stands on the site. The people who buy their groceries have no idea what lies beneath the pavement. The story of Silas has faded into legend, but the old families still lock their doors. The official records say Silas died in 1859, but records can be wrong in the dark places where history forgets to look. Some say he's still out there, still moving north, still searching for the freedom that was promised 12 years too late. What do you think happened to Silas? Did he escape to find the freedom he had dreamed of, or was the official report true? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the darkness humans can inflict, and the strength it takes to survive it, hit that like button and subscribe to the Forgotten Liturgy for more true stories that history tried to bury.